Namaskara. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you are watching or listening to this episode. Just wanted to share that this episode was recorded before I took a really long hiatus from podcasting for about a year and a few months. I had attached a lot of emotions to this episode because of the things that I talk about, as you will hear and listen to. And I guess I entered a phase of my life that came with a bit of funk in it. Um, but that's okay. Things happen. But here we are. So I'll probably get into the details of why I stopped podcasting for that while sometime down the road. But this is a really beautiful episode that I recorded with Anastasia, and I'd love for you all to take away great things from this episode after you listen to it. Thank you so much for being a part and joining me on this journey of podcasting.
Hey Anastasia, how's it going?
It's going pretty great. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thank you. For those of you listening and watching, just a quick explainer. Anastasia and I met each other back in 2020 through the Yes Theory fan page, or I think the page is called Yes Theory Fam, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that's how we met each other, because Anastasia had this Facebook post where she tried to reach out to people from many different places, which we will explore in this conversation. But yeah, that's how we met each other, and now here we are, 2 years down the road, having or doing this. So before we get started, though, if you could introduce yourself, share the things that you like, dislike in everyday life, any future aspirations that you're open to sharing, and yeah, anything and everything you're comfortable sharing.
Okay, well, thank you. It's always kind of like hard to start with like how to introduce yourself to people, but I guess I just have always like I grew up in a very small town in Alberta in Canada, and just like when you grow up, you get exposed to different things and you get to see how like the world is, and as you get more and more aware of what's going on in the world, you start becoming either curious or you lean out of all of that. So I actually moved across Canada right before the pandemic and found myself very isolated and seeing like everything that was going on with the news and all of that, where everyone suddenly pulled away from being close to each other and making new friends and connecting with different people. I decided to go the complete opposite way and just choose to be curious about people. It's like the first time that I thought that in my lifetime that you have like a global shared experience where you're able to see what other people are going through, what they're experiencing, and at the end of the day it was a very similar experience. So I guess my interest is ultimately being very curious and learning and understanding people, and I think it's just fascinating, like you were saying a little bit before, being able to actually like choose to like learn about different people is a choice, and it's something that is very I don't know. I just always loved it. It's part of my purpose and who I am, is figuring out who other people are, what drives them, and being able to equip people on how to actually live out their God given potential. And ultimately, like on the day to day basis, the only thing I'm not passionate about would be mornings. But beyond that, like I don't know. Like there's just so much out in the world, and I think it's really important that people go chase after what they want, and whatever that is. I think it's more important to either go after the life that you really want, or you're failing by default. So that's been like my guiding principle for the last handful of years, for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Why do you prefer the evenings or the nights over mornings?
I just I'm a little bit tardy getting up in the mornings. Like naturally, when it comes to like waking up, my brain is a little bit slower. But as the day goes on, that's when my brain is starting to like fire more and being more curious. And like, of course, when you're able to do things that you love, like a lot of the times when people have jobs, like you're typically, at the end of the day, you get to choose to either go home and watch Netflix, or you get to go out and be curious. And so that's just, my fun time, I suppose.
Hmm. You mentioned the word curiosity quite a bit, and I'm curious. I'm using the word myself now. I'm curious to know, um, was that something you've noticed in yourself from childhood, or was that something that you developed over time?
I would say like so the town that I grew up in was like 3,000 people. Like if you Google Maps it, it's literally like you get a photo of a field and a train, and then that's like the only image that you have. So
Right.
I grew up in kind of like this bubble, and it was very safe. So I don't think I naturally was overtly curious, but I had many like people that would either pull the best out of me by, obviously being educated in school and different things there. But like I would start reading books. And I think after reading books about curiosity and just kind of opening your eyes, like I literally read a book called Curious, and it just said like a way to actually enhance your life is to choose to be curious about everything. And it becomes so much more interesting. And that's, I think part of where it came from was starting to associate with people that had a perspective of curiosity, people that were actually really evaluating what they wanted in their life and then figuring out how I could do the same.
Totally, yeah. Because I think associating with people who are also innately quite curious can, I guess, in some sense, create that community where you can all explore different things, share it with each other, and just learn a lot more. But this is just a thought that popped up in my head as you were mentioning your sort of arc of curiosity. You've heard the saying, right? That curiosity killed the cat, or however that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally have never understood that phrase. Um, but have you ever understood that phrase? Like, have you thought about that ever?
I don't know. Like, there's probably been times where I've been curious in ways that are not favorable to like a good life. But at the end of the day, it's like the amount of like just going in with the perspective of like saying even yes to things and learning and just opening yourself up to things that you wouldn't normally try. Every time I've done it, it has been something that has like grown my mind or shifted my perspective or made me really evaluate how I think. And then as you do that, you start to ask more questions because you realize you don't know the answers.
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, personally, I also feel that in most cases with curiosity, you tend to have more positive experiences than negative experiences. Excuse me. I'm not necessarily trying to diminish the fact that there are negative experiences sometimes. Not to say that I've had a ton of them, but it's definitely possible. So I think that's maybe where that term or that phrase stems from. But yeah, personally, I'm not like a big believer in that of that curiosity kill the cat. If you're curious and if you're willing to explore as much as you can, and of course, like I think everybody has some boundaries, right? So people tend to set some boundaries for multiple reasons. Um, and you can still explore, you can still be curious, but I guess set some boundaries in some sense. But yeah, let's sort of talk about how we met each other through what you had done. So if you can explain to everybody what you did on the Facebook page and sort of talk through some of your thoughts before wanting to put that out, because yeah, I'm curious to know, like, did you think about it a lot? Was it just sort of like, okay, bam, I have this thought, I'm gonna do it now, and let's see how this goes?
It was kind of the latter. Like I had actually basically followed someone else doing that. So there was a gentleman that had posted, and I just thought it was a great idea. And he ended up saying that he wanted to do calls with people. Like, I don't know, I think 100 different countries was his goal, to like talk to 100 different people from 100 different countries. And that's all he wanted to do. And I ended up having a call with him, and I was just obviously curious about why he had done it. And he just said that he wanted to expand his mind, and naturally wanting to expand my mind, I was like, man, how can I do that? And so at that time, it's like, okay, well, I had moved across Canada, and I had been kind of like sitting in my room being like twiddling my thumbs, where it's like you can either sit and watch Netflix or sit and do less productive things. And what that really just encouraged me to do is I like grabbed the whiteboard in my room, and I just said, I don't remember exactly what I put on the sign, but it was just something about wanting to hear people's stories, and I would love to chat. And I ended up getting like 300 different messages from people that wanted to do calls. And I like actually took a map that night with one of my roommates' daughters, and we just sat there and like pinned all the different countries, because I haven't done a lot of traveling. So naturally I got to like travel by proxy, and then just started like messaging everybody. And I think I talked to probably about 80% of all those people, and just like getting to know people and getting to hear their story. And it was just like something where like they often say that when you travel, you see things that you normally wouldn't, or you are experienced to different cultures. Well, when everyone's locked down at home and also bored, like everybody ran out of the excuse of saying I'm busy. So they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm free. And then you'd like, next thing you know, you're talking to someone in the Philippines because you figured out the time zone. And then you're talking about how he works at like a rec park where they had like an active volcano. and you're asking him about like the type of bananas that are in the Philippines because they're supposedly amazing. And lo and behold, I just started making this bucket list. So at the end of every call, I started asking people, like, if I were to travel to your country, what's one thing that everybody has to do? And I made this massive list of just places I wanted to see, people I wanted to meet, because obviously, like, I have actually kept in touch with a handful of those people that I talk to, and very rarely will I meet up with those people. But there's a few people actually in the GTA that I was able to meet up with through that, and like I have like friends that I'm gonna like go see, and we're gonna go do like these bizarre experiences that without having just like that desire to learn about people and want to like actually connect with people. I would never have experienced it. So it's just ultimately like a curiosity experiment. And then also being able to say, okay, man, I really want to travel, but I'm not able to travel right now. So what's the next best thing? And the next best thing is always people. Like, people are always your gateway, and the relationships that you build in life will become your network. And I just want to have like an incredible network where if I'm in Georgia, I can just message them being like, hey, you want to go jump off that waterfall that you messaged me about last week? And, people, especially with the Yes Theory group, like that YouTube channel is fantastic just by creating this culture of people where instead of focusing on the fear, they focus on figuring out how to connect and say yes to things. And even after that, like after those experiences, I was able to go bungee jumping with some friends. We were able to do some like cliff jumping. I've gone on random meetups here or there, and just like have friends all over the world now. That it's so cool.
That is quite cool. I mean, imagine going bungee jumping with people you met over the internet, right? That's kind of wild in some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, I guess we can say it today in the world that we live in, but I don't think people could imagine saying that 10 years back even.
No, for sure.
So it's wild how like times have changed, and how social media and the internet has made it quite accessible to speak to people irrespective of where they are. So that's really cool about social media in general. But I'm curious to know, I guess I'm going to use that word for the rest of this episode, but oh, what was, I wonder, do you remember the first Yes Theory video that you watched? And if you do, like, what sort of drew you to them through the things that they did?
I don't know. What I do know is that when I had moved across Canada, I was staying in like a subpar place, and it was actually kind of like a more shady part of town where um, you actually had to be like in your house at a certain time because it was like gangs were around there, and very different experience from where I like came from, like I mentioned. And so I spent a lot of time in like this room, and I was trying to figure out where to live, and I was trying to figure out all these other things. And then every once in a while I'd just be like, okay, well, like, everybody now goes on YouTube or Netflix, and I just ended up kind of watching almost all of their videos in a very short span of time. And then, of course, like, you use that as a quick in because you join the Facebook group, and that's a really cool thing about that community is I was able to join it. And then I think I'd been there for 2 weeks, and then Christmas was coming up, and they were throwing a Christmas party, and I was able to like help organize that. And I instantly went from having like, two acquaintances in the entire city on the entire side of this country. And then I was around like 20 different people, and like we were all dancing and doing all this like fun stuff. We were at like an art gallery where we like I taught some salsa dancing with some friends, and then we did some Gangnam Style because that was still in then. And some people did some like Bollywood dancing. It was a really cool experience, and it was just kind of like being able to get involved in communities and connect with people that are like-minded is so refreshing.
Yeah, definitely. I think while mentally it can be a little hard to sort of jump that hurdle of meeting people you don't know, in most cases it ends up being quite nice. Like, you have experiences that you can tell stories about
Yeah.
on a random podcast on the internet, so that's really cool how things work that way. But yeah, just to sort of explore this thought that you've mentioned quite a few times about dedicating time towards wanting to do the things that you really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned like it's a bit choice between like either watching Netflix or just working on what you want to do. Do you watch Netflix at all, or have you never watched Netflix?
I have watched Netflix before. I'm not a hermit.
Okay.
But like I definitely watched a bit more than I would have liked during like once those calls kind
Mm,
of wrapped up. When I didn't have time, it was fantastic. But I found that like Netflix just kind of made me like a weaker version of myself. And there's like a great quote. I don't know who it's by, but it was out on the internet talking about like if there's something that you do that makes you weaker, stop doing it. Like you should only be doing things that are actually building you up and making you better. And of course, like when you have the option to watch Netflix, it's comfortable because you're like laying on your bed or your couch and you're eating something kind of enjoyable. But at the same time, it's like you're escaping your own world and you're like your own kind of realm to either like watch other people win in their own lives. And I just spent so much time as a kid when I was back in like into video games and just kind of numbing out in that way where I felt very like sad in those experiences. But when you go out and you actually engage in the world, sure, it can be scary. And I did not naturally have like the tendency to hop on video calls with people. But it's like now, like you do that, you build up the skill of just understanding that other people want to be heard and loved and accepted just like you do. And you stop judging everybody and you stop looking at yourself so much and you just start actually focusing your eyes on other people. So like I watch Netflix every once in a while, like if I want to watch like an old show or something like that. Like the last thing I watched was 10 Things I Hate About You because it's a like something that I remember loving as a child, and I just really wanted to like sit down and enjoy it. But it's almost like when you don't do that frequently, you actually enjoy the experience more. If your life is not about the movies you watch and it's about the life that you live, the movies that you watch can be enhancing to your life for a moment, and then you get back on to like already actually like winning in your own life, whatever that looks like for you.
totally, yeah. Because I think when you pay attention to your own sort of habits in some sense, um, it reaches the point in some cases where you don't even think about the fact that you're opening the Netflix app on your phone or
Mm-hmm.
turning it on or on your TV and watching this whole show, and voila, 10 hours are gone.
Yeah.
Just like that. So it's quite interesting how that happens once you've sort of done that consistently. But I'm curious to know from your own personal experience. You mentioned the fact that you want to avoid doing things that make you weaker. Why do we still try and do that? Like when we know, and maybe this is coming from a place of having seen that in myself, where
Mm-hmm.
I end up being on YouTube for way too long than I need to. So I'm curious to know, like from your own sort of experience, why do you think that we take that path even though we know that it's actually not helpful?
Well, because in the moment, like first of all, everybody like it's the human tendency to want to like coast in life. Like it feels like in the moment, it feels good to coast. It feels a lot easier to like slip on like pajama pants versus actually like putting on an outfit, going out and actually like partaking in the world. And like I by no means am I perfect in that. I definitely will have tendencies where I will, be a bit more lax in what I want to do, but every time I go out, I find myself enjoying it. So it's just like you create a positive neural feedback in your mind. And yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess, over time, um, the resistance to wanting to be lazy uh, grows because you just see how much more excited you are about your own life. And when you are scrolling on like YouTube and whatnot, like it's definitely hard to get out of it. It's like, I don't know if people use this term frequently, but one of my friends and I will talk and we'll call it the scroll hole. Like when you're on Instagram and you're just like scrolling and you're like, oh yeah, 5 more minutes. And then you're like 10 more minutes. And then you're like, okay, on the hour. And then next thing you know, it's like 2, 3 hours later and you're like, oh, and then you just kind of like sit there and it's not always about judging yourself because I think that's where like people are always like I should be doing stuff and it's like it's not about shooting on yourself. It's about actually being like, okay, well, I did this, do I like it? And then maybe next time directing your energy in a way where you're actually like, oh man, that was such a good use of my time. And just actually instead of figuring out like things that you need to cut out, it's like replacing it with good habits. Ultimately like has just grown me and made me a lot stronger as well.
Definitely. You mentioned that you're not perfect. I'm just curious to know what you think about this. Can we as humans ever be perfect?
I don't believe so personally. But at the same time, like I believe that it's an honorable thing to strive to be better. Perfectionism is like one of the crippling things that stops people from going after the life that they really want. I used to call myself a recovering perfectionist because I used to think that, like I'll think my way into the future that I want. Like I'll learn enough like head knowledge, and I'll figure out exactly how to do everything so I don't have to make mistakes. And it's really just like a way where you procrastinate at your own goals. And it probably, like, the change in my life to like where I am now didn't really happen until 6-7 months ago, where I just actually was sitting there in my room really evaluating like, okay, you've sat there thinking about how you want to be, like how you're going to get there, but you're not doing anything. And you just either get like sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you actually change the direction that you're going in, or like you can like idealize perfectionism for the rest of your life, and being perfect is never the goal. Like if you were perfect, I think you wouldn't relate to anybody. Like you'd have like perfect teeth, and everyone would be like, oh man, how do you do that without brushing? It's like, it's just a simple thing that you have to do, even if it's like a very monotonous task. But yeah, I don't believe that people can be perfect, but I do believe that if everyone takes like the mentality of like becoming 1% better every single day, that like there's a book called The Compound Effect, and you can actually just grow over an exponential period of time by having simple daily habits that allow you to win, versus like going 1-0 every day with yourself, versus constantly losing the battle by doubting yourself and looking down on yourself and saying, oh man, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. It's like, stop and just like start where you're at, and then go from there. And I think over time, as people do that, it's just like, sometimes like when you look at those people that seem so far ahead of you, you realize that they just chose those small little habits over a long enough period of time. And if you choose like the same habits of just like waking up earlier and going to the gym, or wearing clothes that aren't always sweatpants, like you actually will start to see like small changes, and you'll respect yourself more, that when you go back to where you were before, it just becomes less interesting and less enticing to do, because you go back to like, you make the person that you grew into more appealing to yourself than the person that you were. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think, like you mentioned, right? Like the human tendency is to coast. I think there's also this human tendency to want to go from 0 to 100 in like 10 seconds
Yeah.
without realizing that it would actually take you, metaphorically speaking, like an hour in comparison to 10
Hmm.
seconds. So that thought in itself can also be quite crippling, to where at some point we feel like, is it worth dedicating that much amount of time if I'm not going to get there as quickly as I want? So I think it's what you said of like realizing that at the end of the day, it's those 1% things that we do that that will compound eventually to
Hmm.
where there is like an exponential growth that you will notice in yourself. But yeah, expanding on that a little more, what helped you separate thought from action?
Being around people that acted a lot. When I was like around friends where all they would do is sit and play video games, like what I did was sit and play video games. And when I was around people that like I felt really like when they would be really unhappy and they would just sit and lament in all their problems, I would do the exact same thing. I would talk about how life is so hard and so difficult. And yeah, ultimately, it's like you become your association by choice. You either choose to have a great association, or by default, you become the people that like you look at in your friend group. I think there's a study that says like you will become the like 95% of who you will become in the next handful of years is the five people you spend the most time with. And when you're around people that are winning in their own life, like I have some really really great friends who are doing amazing things in the entrepreneur world, where when I look at them and I see the type of life that they live, and I see the work that they put in and the fruit that has come from it, it just looks so worth it. And it's so important to connect yourself with people that are actually living the life that you want, instead of just kind of surrounding yourself with people. It's like when you work at a job, you'll have, coworkers that you're given by default, whereas you surround yourself with either friends or people that are going to elevate you just because you know that you're better. And I believe everybody has that like whisper in the back of their mind, knowing that they are made for more, because I really don't believe that there is like any person that is not worthy or anything like that. I don't agree or subscribe to that narrative at all. I believe everyone has worth and value. It's just the only thing that tends to get in people's way is their own thinking. If you're in a hole and you're thinking that you're going to get out just by like isolating yourself longer and saying I'm going to get myself out, well, you got yourself there. And you have to understand that surrounding yourself with people that are going to inspire you, that are going to challenge you, that are going to like grow your brain and actually cause you to act versus just like kind of watch idly from the stands. Like that's, I think, the best thing that people can do for themselves.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. Um, did you feel like you struggled to find your group initially, and was that something that sort of weighed you down, or was it? Did you always go in knowing that you'd eventually find the group of people you want to be around?
No, I definitely did not always have my people. Like growing up, I got very fortunate coming out of high school. My mom always said if you took like a year off from high school, you'll never, or year off from school and you go back to, and you don't go to post secondary, you never will. And she was right. I have never gone back to post secondary since, but in that year off, when I had kind of taken that gap and I was kind of looking at all the friends that I had made in that small town, I was actually introduced to entrepreneurs that just like were talking about how they valued marriage and how they valued making a difference in people's lives, and the fact that significance is important, and not actually chasing happiness but chasing like a purpose. Like I believe that people that are actually pursuing what they are called to be doing are the happiest people on the face of the planet. So like I was able to by proxy kind of get around those people just by being open to the idea of understanding that I didn't know everything. And then as I continued to step into my own person and deal with the things that I needed to work on, like going to therapy and dealing with tough relationships that I had in my life growing up, you just eventually get to a point where you are your own tribe. And like for me, I'm a Christian, and I don't mean that you have to become a Christian to think this by any means, but it's like when you submit to something higher than yourself and you actually allow yourself to release the weight of responsibility, thinking that everything is on your shoulders, and you allow it to be on something that's larger than yourself, that is ultimately the association that you need to be able to step outside of yourself, because you no longer just live for yourself. And that's probably where like I found ultimately my tribe, was just being able to connect with God, and actually having a faith was such an important stepping stone for my own life. And then you just like look at the things that you always wanted to do. Like I remember wanting to learn how to dance, because you see everybody dancing at parties and you're like, man, I just wish I could do that, but I'm so awkward. And you just sit there and you're like, I don't know how to dance. And I get in my head, and everyone needs like liquid courage. And I was like, I want to be able to dance without having to like feel like I need to drink or anything like that. And then by doing that, I was able to learn how to like salsa dance and do bachata and find beauty in those types of things. And you look at the things that you've always like either wanted to do or you've had an inkling, even though it's super uncomfortable. It like took me 2 months of going to the classes. Like I'd drive up to the doors of where the classes were, and it was like 45 minutes away from where I lived, because the town I was from was very small. And then I would drive home because I just couldn't walk myself in the class. And then the first time I went in that class, I was like, man, that was amazing. Everyone was so warm. Everyone was so welcome. They weren't actually judging me. They were excited that I was looking to get better at something that they've all been beginners at before in their own life. And yeah, I think over time, you get right with yourself, and you get right with God or the universe or whatever you deem it to be. And the rest comes by just actually following those inklings and inner desires.
Definitely. There's a lot of questions I want to sort of explore with you, but I'll start off with this one. You mentioned entrepreneurship a couple of times, and I'm curious to know, maybe from like a societal perspective, do you think that a lot more people are trying to become entrepreneurs? And do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it depends on how you define entrepreneurship, because I really believe that entrepreneurship is a mindset, not like a just something that you do. It's either something that you become because you want the results. I think that there's really good questions that are asked through entrepreneurship. Like, you have to take ownership over your own life, and I think that is a phenomenal thing. I think it is really important that people, especially like I still have a job, but I also do have I am an entrepreneur as well, and I have great respect for being an employee, and I am very grateful for the privileges that has offered me, like being able to pay my bills and all that. But then when people are motivated to like be an entrepreneur or start something that they've always wanted to do, it ultimately, I think it's one of the coolest things, because you have to actually do it yourself. Unlike showing up for a job, you can just kind of go into a job and coast. And like, that's what a lot of people love, like, as we just mentioned a little while ago. But with entrepreneurship, it's like you actually have to step up. And there are times with certain things where people, can kind of coast in their own like business life too. And like, there are like plateaus that happen in business as well. But at the same time, going after what people really want, like you look at, everybody knows Amazon now. Jeff Bezos was in like a very high ranking job at whatever corporate firm he was. And I remember thinking this, because this is part of the reason that I eventually moved out to Toronto, is he had said that he always would wonder what if he didn't start Amazon, because initially it was an idea that he had, and he said, like I would love to do this. It was like something that I always wanted to pursue, but he had like this comfort sitting on this other side of just being like, okay, well, this is reliable. This is what I've done. This is what everybody tells me to do. But what if like this goes right? Like, what if I actually go for the life that I want and it works? And I think that if people are actually going for the life that they want, that is the best way to live your life.
Yeah. Yeah. While we do have this tendency of coasting as human beings, I also do believe that in some cases, I guess there is that evaluation of what people are willing to sacrifice.
Mm.
And I think in that evaluation, like, I think some people end up making the decision that they think is right for them at that point in time. And I think it becomes especially challenging, like if you have people relying on you and things like that. So like there's a lot of those nuances also that I tend to think about, because like you, I sort of also believe in the fact that, we should try and explore the things that we want to try and do, because at the end of the day, you would rather try and fail in comparison to live with the regret of not trying, so I do feel like we should try, even if like what the outcome of it is probably not in our hands, but you can at least be confident in the fact that you've tried, and you won't have to live regretfully down the road for not having tried what you wanted to do. So I feel like a lot of those things also tend to play into the way people approach certain crossroads and certain like decisions that they choose to make. But the reason why I asked you that question about entrepreneurship is because I've heard a lot of people talk about, oh, entrepreneurship is not for everybody. You have to be of a certain kind to be able to do that, and things like that. But then you mentioned the fact that entrepreneurship can also just be a mindset in terms of trying to get your own shit together as a human being. So how do you view that dichotomy, if that's the right way of putting it?
Well, I mean, when you look at entrepreneurship, a lot of people attach it to money, but I think if you use entrepreneurship as a larger or as a model or as a way to actually go after the purpose that you have, it's fantastic. And I think that regardless of how you get to what your purpose is, if your purpose is going and helping like special needs people, and you want to specifically do that, you're probably going to have to get a specific job that allows you to do this. Or if you want to be a brain surgeon, you have to go to med school and you have to go down a certain thing. So there's definitely like elements to those like goals and those things. But for me, my purpose was to figure out how to add value to people, how to love people, how to obviously be curious and figure out who I really am. And at the end of the day, it's like when you know what you're guided towards, whatever vehicle gets you there is more important than the work that you do. If you're going after what you really want. Like for me, I don't want to live a life where I am stuck at a job for the rest of my life, but I also want to be able to live an abundantly blessed life where I can actually make a fair amount of money because of the things that I love. Like, I think it's so important that in free countries, like in Canada, I think it's so incredible that you have the opportunity to engage in free enterprise. And not other places, like not all other places, very few other places in the world have that. Like you have the US and maybe a few other countries in Europe, and the rest, you're kind of living in this very kind of top down kind of model where the people that are at the top always make the money. Whereas here you have an opportunity to make a lot of money, and money is ultimately a tool. And so for people that want to do great things in life, you often see like even celebrities will go towards supporting charities and, doing different things for causes that they care about. Like if you build up enough residual income where you can stop thinking about making money, because ultimately when you're spending 40 hours a week at a job and you're like spending 40 hours is a lot of time, or even more, like people will be clocking overtime. It's a lot of time. That is 40 hours that you're not dedicating to something else. And that could be, like for me, a big thing on my heart is dealing with like the child sex trafficking industry, and actually being able to go there. And if you have like things like that bother you, you can't just say, hey, I'm going to pray for something and just say, I wish it to get better. Mm-hmm. You actually have to have time. And you can't just also go to a cause like that saying, oh, I'll just, I'll like be there for you. But sometimes people need money to solve problems. Like difficult problems typically require money. And ultimately, if you are going to do something meaningful with your life, you need to actually surround yourself with people that are going to use money for good. And so I really don't care how people make money. It's like, why are you doing that? And what is your overarching purpose as to why you use entrepreneurship, why you're being a surgeon, why you're doing anything else? It's just ultimately being guided by the difference that you want to make in the leaving like a legacy in people, and being able to equip people on how to think for themselves is something that we just have a responsibility to do in North America. Other people don't have the opportunities that we do. And I really believe that because of that, we are more responsible to live our greatest life, because when you do that and you surround yourself with great people, you can actually make a difference. Like other people maybe in places where they don't even have Wi-Fi or like the internet. And it's crazy to think, but I was having a conversation with a girl the other day from Nigeria, and she was hiding from her parents for 3 years, saving up money through different church donations and different work that she was doing. And she just got to Canada a month ago, and she like came as a refugee from Nigeria because of some personal things that they do in Nigeria that are very absurd and dark and unpleasant. But it's like, you need to free your time up, in my opinion, to actually be there for other people. Most people are so time broke that they can't actually take their eyes off themselves. And that's why I think that for me, entrepreneurship is really the only way forward for what I really like dream about doing, and how I really want to live out who I am.
If you don't mind sharing, how do you juggle your sort of job with your projects and entrepreneurship? And if you also don't mind sharing, what are some things that you do through entrepreneurship?
Well, how do I juggle my time? I just don't watch Netflix.
Fair enough.
It's like the thing. It's not necessarily about what needs to get put into your life, because if you put in like a job and you put in business and you put in all these other things, like that makes your to-do list really long and tiring. It's usually about what you need to take out of your life. And a lot of like the internet, like Instagram, YouTube, all those things are very, like they are wired to make your brain get a ton of dopamine hits so you stay on it longer. And you just like slowly replace those habits with things that are actually going to get you towards what you want. It's like self-discipline is ultimately putting off what you truly want in the long run for what you want in the moment. And am I always perfect at that? Absolutely not. Like I definitely, like mornings are still something that I'm not the most solid in for sure. But at the end of the day, it's like you go to sleep well rested when you know that you're actually trading off something of lower status. Like when I sit there and watch YouTube, I'm not like, oh man, that was a win. When I sit there and I talk to someone that just came from Nigeria, that moved here and like basically knows no one, but had the courage to escape a country that was very unsafe for her and escape very bad situations, I'm like, man, this is where I'm meant to be. Is I'm meant to be in other people's lives, making like freeing myself up. Like like I said, most of the time, people just don't have the time to actually be emotionally available for other people. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned this story about this person from Nigeria moving to Canada as a refugee. And you mentioned the fact that, since there's a lot of freedoms that North America has to offer, which we should dedicate towards helping people around the world out. I'm curious to know, maybe this is coming from someone who's Indian, who's from the other side of the world. Do you... I had a succinct question in my mind, but now it's all over the place. Is it possible for people in North America, while in most cases people come in with quite good intentions of trying to help out, do you feel like in that intention of wanting to try and do good, there might be some cultural nuances that
sure.
people might miss out on?
Yeah, I'm not saying like go dig wells in Africa. It's like get your home in order first. Like you fix yourself, you fix your like your own life, your own doubts, you deal with your own problems, you free up your time. And like that girl that I was mentioning, like I mainly talked about her because I spoke to her on Sunday, and it was just like a very powerful conversation that I had. But then we were able to talk about the types of freedoms that you have in this country. And it's like, I really believe that making true change is not about going to some other place and doing whatever it is that you want to do. You can absolutely make change that way, but the best thing that we can do is fix ourselves, and then fix our families, and then like fix your neighborhood. And then it's like Mother Teresa said, it's like someone had asked her, how do you know that you've actually like accomplished everything that you wanted to accomplish, and how do you know that you've actually done everything that you need to do? And she's like, one person at a time. And it's through relationship, it's through connecting with people, it's through valuing people that you do that. It's not by cutting a huge check and saying, here you go, here's like a well. It's about actually like loving other people's cultures, loving the differences that exist between people, but then understanding the unifying thing. I remember one time I was at an Oprah conference, and she had said something that was just so profound to me, where she would like interview people that were like high on drugs or had like really, really rough like upbringings. And then she interviewed Barack Obama. And she said after all of the years when she would interview these people and listen to these people and talk to them, when the cameras went down, they would usually ask her, was that good enough? Was that what you needed? And so even like the president of the United States wanted to know, like, do you hear me? And does what I say matter? And it's ultimately like through relationship that your life is changed. It's not through just like small one-off acts. It's through how you live your life and how you choose to engage with the world. So I absolutely agree with like there are cultural differences. It's one of those plights of North America, is like that moral satiation where you want to share a post. It's crazy if you share like say on Facebook, you share just some tragedy that's happening in some place in the world. What that actually does to your brain is the exact same response as going to that country and volunteering. And so what I think it's created is like this culture of people where they want to like virtue signal and say, hey, I care, but I'm just going to stay in my bed and watch Netflix. I'll repost that because it matters, but not enough for me to actually get uncomfortable. And so I think that, there's definitely like a benefit to going to other places and whatnot. But at the same time, the best way to make change is to actually continue to uplift the people that are closest to you. And then through that, like, especially in Toronto, it's so cool. Like there's millions of different people here and like tons of different cultures. It's like a melting pot for the rest of the world. Like you'll be talking, like the other day I was out on a walk and this guy was selling coconuts, and he had gotten the coconuts imported from Costa Rica, and he's got his machete and he's standing there just with like this machete, like cutting up the coconuts and like passing them to everyone and saying, hey, you want a coconut? And just like sharing this, and like being able to see him. He was from Trinidad, and then like by connecting with him, like that ripples slowly through time and throughout the people that he knows and the relationships that he's connected to. And that's how you change the world. It's not by like saying that you're just going to have a lot of money and solve a lot of problems. It's by engaging with people that are right in front of you.
Definitely, yeah. Because I think with what you just said about that sort of the signals that our brain senses in terms of our actions, be it through virtue signaling or actually doing something, it's fascinating how that works. Because also, I think at the end of the day, people tend to have, I guess, a savior complex, or at
For
least that's the
sure.
generation that we live in.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of the times, just because you tweet something,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I'm sure I might have done something similar in the past,
Yeah.
but, over time, you tend to realize that your tweet is not going to do anything for somebody,
Mm-hmm.
literally going through shit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also that realization of, um, you need to put things in order for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because, and correct me if I'm wrong with this quote, but I heard someone mention that Jordan Peterson said this quote about clean your own room.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah,
a quote that I'm
it's basically the general like thing that he said is basically like get everything else in your house in order before
right?
you go out and criticize the world.
Right. Yeah. 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 When he was sort of talking about that, I was reminded of that quote that somebody else mentioned on a video that I was watching recently. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating how um, all of those things sort of work in our brains, because there's a lot of quotes and cliches where people mention be the change you want to see,
Right.
and things like that, which in some sense, when you think about it, that's actually quite true, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't necessarily put somebody else's situation in order while your own house is burning down.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's quite a fascinating dichotomy that we have as human beings. And throughout the conversation, I've noticed that you've mentioned a lot of these sort of psychological related aspects quite a lot. So I'm curious to know, do you have like a deep interest in psychology, like in human beings in general?
I just read books.
Hmm.
That's what one of the things that I love that Elon Musk had said is like I don't remember his education. I don't believe there was much other than him being like, who he is now, everyone knows. But um, they asked him like, are you even like qualified to focus and like build rockets and do this stuff? And he says, I just read a lot of books. And ultimately,
Hmm.
it's like, again, it ties back to what I had initially said about being curious. It's like, for me, the reason that I want to learn is so I can figure out how to connect with people. Like, I love being able to actually understand how people think, because then it makes me less prone to judge them. Because as much as people don't like to think that they judge people, there is like a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. And naturally, from our primitive brain, you naturally want to see if someone is safe or unsafe, to see if they are like an enemy or someone that you can trust. And so for myself, there's like these things that naturally come up. And I believe it's across all cultures, as you naturally want to assess people, seeing if they're like there to understand who you are. And for someone that deeply values other people and connecting and learning and really genuinely trying to understand people, psychology kind of just naturally becomes something that's a fascination to me, because if you can observe yourself from like a bird's eye view instead of always just kind of being in everything. And I think that also is done with having people in your life that aren't in your mess all the time. You're able to just like actually like zoom out and see how other people are viewing things and how you could be coming off wrong, or how you could be concerning to someone, or how it could be uncomfortable to people. So yeah, it's definitely become an interest because it matters. Like, it matters to understand people's biases, so I don't think, oh man, what a fool. I'm like, oh, they're just thinking that because they've probably been thinking that their entire life, because other people have taught them to think that way. It's not by any fault of their own. Like, you only know what you know, unless you choose to learn something that you don't know. And naturally, if people are going to revert to just coasting in life, people are doing the best that they can. It's just sometimes the best that they can be doing in that moment isn't necessarily what you're expecting. And really kind of calibrating your expectations for other people is really important to allowing yourself to engage with an open heart versus being closed off.
Yeah, you make a lot of fascinating points there that if I can remember them all one at a time, I'll explore them all together. Um, but firstly, I wanted to sort of mention the fact that you brought up like how, sort of understanding the way people think will go a long way in terms of helping us not judge them as much. Because, like you said, it's maybe part of the primitive brain where, like your initial instinct is to look at someone and all of a sudden, like, you're generating all these thoughts about this person,
Mm-hmm.
maybe mentally trying to put them down, trying to make yourself seem better than them, or vice versa. You put yourself down and you see them as being better than you, and like that vicious cycle of just overthinking and judgment goes on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's definitely possible to sort of notice your own thoughts and catch yourself while you're going down that rabbit hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think this is something that I've noticed in myself over time. And I have to give thanks to the habit of meditation that I've picked up in that sense, because it's helped me notice my own thoughts a lot to
Mm-hmm.
where sometimes, um, say, for example, I'm at the gym and I see somebody walking in, and like all of a sudden, my brain fires a thought, but then I catch myself. I'm like, hold up.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, that might have been your initial thought, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the way you see that person.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, like taking the gym, and I mean, I personally am not the best, I'm not in the best of shape, but I'm working towards being there. And that's something that I'm just using this as an example, because we're talking about like judgment. I think it's very easy to sort of judge people,
Mm-hmm.
even at a gym. Like you might see somebody that's out of shape, like breathing heavy, in comparison, like when you, what am I trying to say? So for example, somebody's biking,
Mm-hmm.
but then you see them panting while you compare them to yourself, and you're like, oh, I'm way better than this guy. But
Mm-hmm.
then in actuality, we kind of have to realize that this person's here to better themselves too.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they didn't necessarily think that way, they wouldn't be in here. So rather than trying to sort of put them down, appreciate the fact
Mm-hmm.
that they've noticed that there's something that they need to
Mm-hmm.
change, and sort of like uplift them in that
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually grew up with a really negative, like proclivity to judge people. And I remember when I wanted to change that, I was working at a pool as a lifeguard. And I remember saying, like, anytime you start thinking something negative, as soon as you do that, because there's like science behind, if you think one negative thought, it usually takes about 3 positive thoughts to actually compensate for that. I want you to say like 3 things, and even if it's like, oh, she's at the pool, oh, she's with her family, and I'm like happy that she has a smile on her face. Like even if it was that, then it's like over time, like you do these small little things where my natural proclivity when I meet someone will be something positive, and people will be like, oh, you just have like a positive personality. It's like, no, that's something that you choose, because it's very easy to choose to not have like a positive perspective, or view things in a way where people are, I don't know, made for greatness. And it's just like your life becomes better when you see the best in people. And I know that John Maxwell always says, he's like a leadership author, and he says, I always view people with a 10 over their heads, because they're going to be the only reason that they put themselves any lower. I'm going to treat them just the same as if someone is, a millionaire, or if they're, broke and they're, in college and they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And at the end of the day, you give that people the space by giving them that positivity to step into who they really are. And I think that if I didn't have people that um, saw who I could become and saw the best in me, I don't really believe that I would be who I am today. And it just ultimately comes down to being grateful for the friends that I was able to make early in my adult life, and the connections that I was able to make, where people, instead of seeing the worst in me and instead of focusing on all the small minded things, they were able to say, hey, like, we're just going to view you up here. And if you want to ever come up here, that's fantastic. But if you're down here, like, you can do whatever you want, and we're not going to change our perspective of you. It's up to you. And it just like frees you up to actually just love people.
Definitely, definitely. And I think something that I think kind of helps me is to sort of ask myself where these sort of negative thoughts are coming from, and try and sort of at least navigate what I could do to minimize them as much as possible. I think again, like we mentioned previously, we're not perfect human beings. We're gonna do dumb shit sometimes. That's just who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot to learn from asking ourselves a lot of questions as well, in terms of be it certain thoughts that you have or your certain proclivities and just the way you are. I think exploration, like self exploration, can go a long way in terms of, I guess, realizing some of the things that we do without even batting an eyelid. Like there's some things that we do on like cruise mode, but then I think once we start asking ourselves those questions, like we'll realize why we're doing those things in cruise mode and what we could do to probably change and be better. But I'm curious to sort of explore on this thought of expectations that you brought up earlier, and the sort of expectations that you have from people around you. I've mentioned this in previous episodes too, but I've burnt myself, mentally speaking, by like having certain expectations and things like that from other people, which hasn't necessarily helped me out because, I've noticed the fact that I have these expectations of people, but firstly, I've not necessarily aired them out to them. I haven't told them what I
Right.
expect from them. So it's foolish of me to firstly think that they would give me what I expect without me even telling them. Like, for example, like, I mean, it's not that I've had a girlfriend, but if I did, I expect her to take the trash out, but then I've not told her to take the trash out. But then I'm mad at her for not taking the trash out. So I feel like that in itself can be quite a vicious cycle, to where we can sometimes forget that a lot of these things that we have in our minds about about the things that we expect from people, there's many different, I guess, reasons for why some people can't meet those expectations and so on. Or sometimes one of those reasons being yourself. So how do you view that, like in terms of expectations and expecting things from people? Because I think it's something that is quite important to realize, be it for ourselves or for the relationships that we have with people.
Well, first of all, I don't think you're a fool, or like the foolishness that you said to have like silent expectations is a very human experience. Like we expect the best of ourselves. Like we judge ourselves by our own intentions, and we judge other people by their actions. So it's like in your head, everybody's supposed to live up to who you want them to be. But in your head, you could be sitting on your couch being like, I'm thinking about having a six pack. And you're like, good. And you're like, yeah, I got this. And it's like, it's just a human experience of just actually understanding that, again, we're not perfect, and we are a work in progress, and we always will be. And especially with relationships, when people are closer to you, you do have expectations of them, because I expect the best of myself. Like I expect myself to continue to grow. I expect myself to work on myself. I expect myself to actually like get up on time for work. Like it can just be small, simple expectations that we have for ourselves. And so naturally, like we put them on to other people because that's just part of who we are. Like everybody, like again, like I said, you judge other people by their actions, and you judge yourself by your own intentions. But like having expectations of other people, ultimately, like there's a really good book by Brene Brown. I think it's again Rising Strong or something. She's a fantastic author, and she has this one part on perfectionism, and she was saying like, do you think that people are doing the best the best that they can? And she was having this conversation with her therapist, and then later her husband. And so when her therapist had asked her that question, she had said, absolutely not. Like they are not doing their best. They are not this. And then she had talked to her husband, who seemed like much just jollier and happier in his own life. And she had asked him the same question, and he said, well, life is better when I do believe that people are doing the best that they can. And so if you remind yourself that people may not see things, like this is again why psychology becomes kind of naturally interesting to me, is because you remind yourself that people aren't necessarily able to see the things that you see, because maybe they are doing the best that they can, but they just have a different capacity than you. They haven't been as far down the road as you, or like we all move at our own speed. But if you're seeing forward moving progression in people, like if you were saying this hypothetical girlfriend doesn't take out the trash, like instead of like getting mad at her next time, I'd just be like, okay, well, why don't I just remind myself that if I see her, to say, hey, next time, could you take out the trash? And you take the trash out the first time. And then, just kind of slowly, if you see progression where one day she takes it out and you don't even have to tell her, like that's, forward moving progression. It just may not be in the time that we want.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things that sort of affected the way that I looked at things because, everybody has their own dispositions, and it could be cultural, could be familial, could be multiple different things that lead them to do things a certain way. So, a lot of the times we can't necessarily expect people to view the world the way we view it, because the way they view the world is sort of a product of their own lived experiences. So I think realizing that also sort of goes a long way in sort of detaching yourself from being, I guess, so demanding mentally or like in the real world. But yeah, it's just interesting how that works. I don't know if this is an idea that you've read in any books or have heard of anywhere, but I wonder if that has anything to do with like the primitive mind and how, a lot of it back in the day was give and take. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I wonder if those predispositions of, I guess, evolution have a role to play in that. I don't know, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm sure they do. I don't know anything specifically that comes to mind when you say that. But like naturally we do live in a give and take society. Like we're definitely, like, one of the things that I loved about when I moved here, I was living with people from Syria for about like 6 months, and like Middle Eastern culture is quite different than North American culture. And one of the things that I loved is, like, I grew up with my parents, like, always kind of like, if you invite a friend over, then they'll make food for them. They won't just kind of like give it to you. And I'd like come over, and then I wouldn't even be like, I would go grab my own groceries, but they'd already be making food, so they'd be like, come eat with us now. And like as soon as they'd have like their own little festivities, or like I'd be, going to my room, and they'd be like, oh, we're having tea now, come sit with us. Like they would just invite you in. And so I think, again, in this culture, it definitely has a tendency to lean towards like give and take, because we're trying to evaluate, and we also isolate ourselves. It's like there's a saying that I love, and it's like, if you make a lot of money, build a longer table, not a taller fence. And what we've done in this culture that is so abundantly wealthy with just like material stuff is we've built really tall fences between each other, whether that's emotionally, whether that's culturally. But when I was living with those people from Syria, or even the people I live with right now, they're Filipinos, and another like great culture where it's just so warm. Like they'll be like one of them is actually moving back to the Philippines this Thursday, and last weekend the landlord went and bought a ton of, he probably spent like $200 on steaks and stuff. And then there's about 10 people living in this house, and he went and cooked up all these steaks, and probably only ate one of the steaks himself, but then just for the people that were living there as like a celebration. And it's like, this is like, people come together with food, people come together with acts of kindness. And it's not something that I think people naturally lean towards in certain cultures, is saying like, hey, I'm just going to give because I love. And so I think there's definitely like a cultural basis that makes us probably more prone to thinking, hey, we need to take, because it's easier to take as well than it is to give. Like when you are, raised in a culture where it's just normal to share lots of food, it's way different than if you're used to just scrounging for every penny just to get like your Mr. Noodles cup. So
yeah, because in some sense it's a lot more easier to take than it is to give, because I guess giving takes a lot of effort. In some sense it takes like some mental math in your head to evaluate, okay, if I do give something to someone, am I giving away too much or am I giving away too little? And so I think in some sense it's definitely a lot easier to take than it is to give. But I'm curious to know, sort of from the anecdotes that you've shared about being around people from Syria and the Philippines, again, this is coming from an outsider's perspective of being from India, but I do feel like Western culture in itself propagates a lot of individualism. I'm wondering if you ever thought about that and how, that possibly affects the way that people are individualistic in this part of the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely more, it leans that way for sure. It definitely does. In at least in my opinion. And like, yeah, it ties into, I guess, that give take mentality that we were just mentioning. But I also think that that's why I think for North Americans it's so valuable to travel, is you get exposed to other people that like share more and like just kind of do things more collectively. But I also think like both sides of the coin, like too much collectivism can be a bit dangerous, where that girl that I mentioned earlier that was from Nigeria, like her family was not actually like safe for her. And so getting out was way more difficult for me to move across the country. I didn't say, hey mom, hey dad, I'm going to like drive across the country because I got a dream and I'm going to go chase it. I was like, okay, I'm leaving. I will be leaving on this date, and I will come visit you when I can. And then, like, there's benefits to both. I just think it's also, again, with the way that people think, you naturally lean towards a cognitive bias of certainty, and so any belief that you hold, you're naturally going to try and prove it right more so than you are going to prove it wrong. And I think it's very important to and I use the word because I really believe, like, attack any belief you have, because if you're firm in what you believe and what you think and what you understand, you're not bothered by the fact that some people say, hey, I want to go do this, or hey, I want to go do that, because you're like, oh no, that's not something that I value, because I've actually understood and taken the time to understand what I need to like live the life that I want. And I think individualism becomes dangerous only when people are so fixated on trying to like live in that space.
Right. And I guess like it's a combination of both that we need to, I guess, live this life in some sense, because we need a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, right? We can't be on the extremes of either side, because that comes with its own challenges. And like, yeah, like the thing that you mentioned about this Nigerian person, um a lot of Eastern cultures
Mm-hmm.
like are quite family dependent, and it's a lot about family. And I mean, I appreciate that for
Mm-hmm.
what it is being from that part of the world. But I can see why it becomes problematic when there's certain, again, going back to expectations, there's certain expectations that families have from their kids or from their cousins or whoever or their relatives, while not really understanding that those expectations might be holding them back
Mm-hmm.
from like becoming their own human beings. Because at the end of the day, like, nobody owns anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, as human beings, like, while I'm really grateful for the parents I have, they don't really own me as a
Right.
human being. I'm my own person. um so it's quite interesting to sort of navigate in terms of the thought. And since you brought this up, I'm curious to know, again, I've probably used that word way too many times.
This podcast has to be titled the Curious Podcast episode.
For sure, for sure. Excuse me, but yeah, can you sort of talk me through your sort of experience of leaving home, and like some of the thoughts that you had at that point,
Mm-hmm.
like in terms of confronting your family, making that choice, and
Mm-hmm. Well,
taking that
after
jump?
that, I would love to hear about your experience, because I find that anybody that has the courage to move away from their family, like, it's so beautiful. I think it's like such a strong like thing that people have, and it takes a lot of courage. So when I speak of it, it sounds so silly, because people will be like, yeah, I moved to a place where I don't speak the same language and I had to learn English, and you're like, man, I moved in the same country. So like when I talk to people, a lot of the time they have such wilder stories. But I actually wanted to move for about 4 years. I had
Hmm.
heard from my friends that they wanted to go out to Toronto because, small town thinking, in a way where it's like, I want to go make a difference, so go to where the most people are. And also like experiences, like you want to adventure, like there's a big airport here, and of course bad timing when I got here, but there's so many things that open up when you do go somewhere where you're not known. You really have to kind of figure out who you are. But it took a long time to actually work up the courage to go there, because initially it was kind of like a passing thought. And then I was like looking at places to stay and whatnot. It was like this on and off thing where I had a lot of stuff that I didn't want to run away from. So I had to spend a lot of time actually in that like 4 year period before I went. I probably went to therapy for about, I think, 2.5 years to work on some of my internal struggles and making sure I wasn't running away from again, relationships in my life or things from my past where I think it's really unfortunate if people have to run from their own life. And sometimes it's a survival mechanism. But for me, it was like, it's easier to run away from them in the minute than to actually just say, hey, let's go talk to a therapist and sit with your stuff. And this is what is important about actually working on yourself. But at the end of all of that, I just was continuing to work. I didn't really think that I would move. It was always kind of like in the back of my mind. And I was working out with my personal trainer, and he had casually told me he and his fiance were planning to move to BC on the island. And I was like, man, Ty, like hearing you say this makes me want to move to Toronto. I always said that I wanted to. I always dreamed about it. I talked about it for so long, but I never did. And he looked at me and said, why didn't you? And the only answers that I could like muster out of myself, because when you go to therapy, you get really honest with yourself about where you're actually at versus where you think you are in your head. And I had said to him, because I lacked courage. And then at the end of our training session, I like get in my car and I'm like driving home and I just start crying because I was like, this is not the type of person that I want to be. So I actually called up one of my friends who I had told like years ago, I want to move. And I was like, I'm moving because I need to, because I will always wonder what if. Like if I don't actually do this, it's actually me not choosing to be courageous and go for what I really want. And I ended up finding, I had like a specific date that I was able to move because I was getting a surgery on my back done. And so I had waited for like a year to get it. And then I like literally the day after like the healing process, I decided to drive across. It ended up being Thanksgiving weekend. And then I drove all the way across Canada, and it took a lot longer than it should have because in Canada we have a bit more snow than most people, and it was like late October. And so in Manitoba is known for like having these really crazy snowstorms. And of course, the weekend I decide to go, it's like one of the craziest snowstorms that they had ever had. And so the highway was shut down. So just like imagine me packing everything up in my little tiny car. It was like a tiny little Nissan. And I drove across, and then I was stuck at this thing because they literally shut off the highway. And I was driving past like 400 semi trucks. And I like pulled up my camera at one point because we were going so slow. And I was like, look at this. This is insane. And they finally just, it happened to be the time that I got there where they opened it up. But there was one trucker when we were pulled over for a minute that was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm moving across the country. And he's like, you are crazy to move across right now. Like, why don't you go home and go another time? And I was like, I gotta go now. And it was just one of those things that when it's so much easier when you actually make the decision and you follow through on what you say you would do. So yeah, then I ended up getting there a few days later. And when I got here, it was a little bit of a crazy thing. There was a lot of stuff that happened when I first moved here. It was not the warmest experience that I had ever had, for sure. Like when you grow up in like a very warm environment and then you go to where like people are busier and bigger cities, it's definitely less warm, at least from my experience, and got tossed around a little bit. But it's like you look back on that and it's like if I had never done that, and whatever it is for whoever like listens to this, it's like whatever it is that you always want to do, it's so important that you actually just make that decision. And then as you start walking it out, it just gives you so much peace. I remember walking, and I know that the CN Tower is kind of like one of the big Toronto staples. And I remember walking down this one road with some of my friends that had come out to visit, and I just like started like looking at this tower and started crying because I was like so proud of myself and who I had done, like what I had done for me and for what I actually really wanted. And it was this really important like kind of thing where it's like you actually follow through on what you said you would do versus just kind of talking. So that's, you know, my experience of moving here. And then of course, I think like a month and a half later, like, or I guess 2 months later, COVID kind of went full force. And that's when ultimately I was alone and I was like, let's talk to people around the world because what else am I going to do? So.
Right. But yeah, you mentioned that you wanted me to share my experience. So I'm curious, like, what exactly do you want me to expand on?
Well, like you came from India, and like, how did that story look like for you? Because I know for myself, it was a really like it really meant a lot to me to actually do that for myself. And like to actually say like I'm going to do this and I'm going to and I was, and like when you go actually follow through on it, it's just so powerful. So I'd love to hear like why you decided that like that was the right decision for you. What made you say, hey, enough is enough. Unless you were just like, I'm going to get on a plane and just go, because, you know, there are those people that do that too. But I think that leaving your family, especially if you live in like a naturally more like closely knit culture, is probably harder.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot harder, but for me, I guess it's slightly different. Like, I guess I'm not the sort of typical Indian family kid, because, so long story short, in terms of my origins, I was born in the UAE. I was born in the United Arab Emirates, because that's where my parents were working. They were working there as expats. So basically, around the time that the recession hit, I moved to India while my parents still stayed in the UAE with my younger sister. So I moved to India to go to school from 2010, and I was basically staying with my grandmother. And while, you know, I love it a bit, you know, there's a huge age gap to where there's some things that are just not understood. So in some sense, I learned how to be by myself. And I think that helped me take the jump of moving to the US, and I think that also gave my parents some level of confidence in terms of being like, all right, cool, we'll send you over there. Because my main goal of moving here was to go to school, because I wanted to study forensic science, and there weren't as many enticing options in India or anywhere else than there were outside of India. So I looked at options like Australia and the US, and, you know, I landed here. I guess, like, in some sense, I'm really grateful for the fact that my parents were willing to support, you know, this 18-year-old's decision of wanting to move across the world, you know, because at the end of the day, they wanted to give me the best education that I could get in terms of my curiosities and what I wanted to do. So I don't think it was much of a thought in terms of, oh, okay, I'm going to be away from family. Because while I was around relatives and I was around a lot of family, I wasn't necessarily around my parents and my sister. So I guess making that jump of moving to the US and living alone wasn't really that hard in some sense, luckily, because I think my experiences up to then had set me up to take this jump. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I personally am a believer of the fact that, you know, you're meant to be in certain places at certain times in your life, and like that tends to sort of impart some wisdom on you to where you can, you know, take the next sort of choose a path that when you reach a certain crossroads. But anyway, so yeah, I think while, you know, I've had moments of feeling quite alone and you know, feeling lonely, even though I have friends around me, like, and some really great friends from college, there'd be many times where I'd feel like quite the loner, to where I think I'd reached a point where I'd internalize the fact that I would end up being a loner in some sense. I know I'm going off into a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think my sort of upbringing and like my living condition to when I was 18, which, I mean, to be brutally honest, like, I didn't have the toughest upbringing. You know, it was quite like my parents went through their own struggles, and I think that's for most parents, at least what I've noticed in Indian culture. I can't speak for the culture over here, but in India, like, a lot of the times the parents' goal is to make their kids' lives easier in some sense. So, you know, I'm lucky in that sense to where they did the best that they could to give me what they could give me. So yeah, like, making that decision wasn't that hard, but of course it came with its own challenges. But I'm here today, and, you know, I'm all in one piece. So knock on wood. Yeah, everything, like, luckily, thanks to God, has been good. And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's just it's refreshing to hear about someone else, because it's one of these juxtapositions where I've talked about myself so much that being able to hear more about who you are is always refreshing. So
awesome. I usually mention this in the, like, before we start recording, but I forgot to in this instance. But yeah, if you have any other questions that you want to throw my way, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot at this point, but if there's anything else that you want to ask me before we sort of transition into the latter stages of the podcast, feel free to, like, anything
I
that
guess
you
you've
want me
asked
to
me a
ask.
lot about like the different things that I like went through, and like just like I've spoken a lot about courage and the importance of pursuing what you want, and actually chasing after those things. I'm curious for you. What are like some moments when you look back on the things that you've done in your life so far? What have you done that has like made yourself proud of who you are?
I think definitely one of those things is starting this podcast, because it was sort of like an epiphany that hit me in 2020, like in June or July, where I was like, oh, um, the world feels like a really wild place right now. Maybe I should do something to where I can just have people from many different places, irrespective of how well I know them, sort of share their stories and sort of connect in some sense. Because, I mean, I just have this personal belief to where foundationally, I think all humans want is some level of happiness, uh, and like some good people around them to where they can live a happy and peaceful life, and some, like, from some sense of relating to one another, irrespective of where we are on the face of the earth. But yeah, like, I think one of those moments where, again, like, compared to a lot of the other things that people have to do, um it's not the hardest thing to do, I suppose. But it was definitely like a jump that I was mentally evaluating for a good 5 to 6 months, because a lot of the times I feel like as human beings we get these thoughts, oh, I want to become an astronaut, or oh, I want to do this, or oh, I want to do that. um at least that's how I am. Not the astronaut part, but other things. So for me, I was like, okay, give yourself some time, think this through. If you still feel after a month or two that you want to do this, then okay, take that plunge. So yeah, like, I mean, 2 months later, I was still sort of thinking about ideas, what I want to do, how I want to sort of start, um, like the name of the channel, and etc., etc. Like, I pulled out my journal, I made like a list of a few people that I'd love to have on, some sort of intentions in terms of what I want to do and things like that. So after those 2 months, I was like, all right, let's do this. So initially, I was a little scared to tell my parents, because um, I guess this is part of it, is probably just like a sort of conservative approach that Indian culture tends to have. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing necessarily, but yeah, like, I didn't want my parents to feel like they sent me, because my parents have supported me throughout my education, and I didn't want them to feel like they've sent me out here um, to study forensic science, and here I am, like, being an idiot on the internet. I didn't want them to feel that way. So I spoke to my mom. I was like, look, I know this is kind of left field, but I want to do this. I will give myself a year. So please give me that 1 year. And if I feel like I want to continue doing it, then I will continue doing it. So yeah, I mean, here I am a year and a half later, still doing it. So there's something that keeps me wanting to continue, irrespective of some hurdles, like, personally, that I've had, mentally speaking. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely one of those things that I'm proud of, because irrespective of, like, people who've been constant followers of the channel probably know, like, I took a month's break because I reached a point where I felt like I wasn't my best version, or I wasn't even working towards it, because all I did was just lay in my bed, feel sad, and like not do anything else. So I had to take a month off to just evaluate things and try to sort of get things together again. And I mean, that's still a work in progress, but the fact that there was that internal voice that kept me wanting to come back and try doing this, I think that in itself was kind of like an inkling that I felt, to where I was like, okay, maybe this is something I should pursue for a lot longer than just 1 year and give it up. Because especially with, I think, content creation specifically, And this is a thought that I always tend to have, like the metrics matter, the numbers matter. And this is something that my mom and I have had a conversation about, to where she was asking me, like, like, what are you doing to get these metrics up and all that sort of stuff. So, while it can be easy to sort of let those things bog you down, I think I came in knowing that it will take some time. And sometimes while I tend to get carried away with, oh, like nothing's really happening, I sometimes reach a point where I'm trying to overdo things. I know I've gone into a quite random tangent at this point, so please stop me at any point
Hey,
if
didn't
you
you
want
name
to.
your podcast Random Relatability? So random tangent just actually flows perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I believe in, which is why I don't mind doing it. But I know it's not everybody's thing. So yeah, that's why I just said that. But yeah, I think those feelings, like in general, make me feel like I want to stick it out and try and doing it as much as I can. Because ideally, like in an ideal world, I'd love to be making, I'd love to make, excuse me, a lot of money out of this and sort of have this as my primary source of income, in comparison to having to work 40 hours a week and also do this.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's that gamble that we have to take as human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and to sort of take that leap of faith and be like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
things are going to be hard, but if there's a voice in your head that's like, yeah, come on, do that, you should do that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like with me, especially with this venture that I've started, when I'm not doing anything, this is the only thing that I think about. Oh, what are we going to do to, I mean, I say we, but I guess some imaginary friends or the universe. What am I going to do about this? Or how am I going to try and work on getting some numbers up? Because at the end of the day, like, we live in a world where numbers matter. So, while I don't want to make my life about seeking those numbers, I should work towards trying and getting a better sort of
Mm-hmm.
reach with the stuff that I'm doing. So
Can I
that was
can
definitely.
I
I'm
sneak
sorry, go
something
ahead.
in there just really quick?
Yes, yes,
I'm
yes. Please do.
just there's this one thing that John Maxwell said, because as much as I understand that numbers matter, because numbers can sometimes mean like money, or numbers can also mean a lack of money, or a lack of attention, or like a lot of attention. When John Maxwell was like early in his writing career, and like he's the number one leadership author, and he's like sold like what 34 million books. When he started, he was told by one of his mentors not to write books to make money. He was told to write books to impact people. And so if there's like one thing that I can just kind of say is like, as much as those things matter, if what you do fulfills you, it will come. Like, you can work hard enough at what you do by being persistent. Like, the only way that people lose, and it's crazy to think there's like crazy examples of people like the guy that started KFC. He didn't make it technically until 65 when he started KFC, because I think he had had multiple failed businesses before. And I really believe that as much as like people can focus on the numbers, as much as even like in my business, I focus on numbers. I'll be like, man, I need to get like these numbers up higher. I need to get this focused, and I need to get this sorted out and this dialed in. They matter for like a minute, but then you have to be so busy in the work that you're not staring at them. Because when I stare at them, I have a giant whiteboard in my room, and it doesn't do me any good to actually like remind me that I actually love the work that I do. Like, what I do is actually deeply fulfilling and important to who I am. So like, if what you're doing is bringing you joy and you are still able to do it on top of working 40 hours a week, like, obviously everybody wants to make it, and we're in this stage, especially at this age, where we're like all trying to make it. We're like trying to, we're in that kind of like gritty phase. But you look down at people that are down the road, and they say that like the things that they look back on are the times where they were so focused on figuring out how to make it. And it's just like, as long as you continue to pursue something, as much as it's tough and difficult, like that is like the work of yourself, like you were mentioning, um, like having moments where you were not feeling the greatest, and you took like a month off to break. The fact that you got up is the part that matters. It's not the fact that you fell down, because that's going to happen over and over and over and over and over and over again. Like, the amount of times I have fallen down but then chosen to get back up. It's like the only way that you will ever lose with yourself is by choosing to stay down. So I just felt like throwing that in there because it's just it's amazing to hear you talk about like sticking it out, because like there are millions of starters in the world. Everybody starts like a hot bod summer bod challenge at the beginning of the New Year's, but then like 2 weeks later they've fallen off the horse. And the fact that you are still pursuing it a year and a half later, irregardless of needing a month to kind of figure things out, because that's just how life is. Some seasons are different. Some seasons you can run really hard. Some seasons call for you to do different things in your life, like you're even planning when your family comes and visits. It's just something I felt like kind of throwing in there, because I really think that with the way that you speak and the excitement that you have for the work that you're doing with this, it doesn't sound like it's a wasted like amount of energy. It sounds like you are actually deeply invested in it. Like if it's something that all you can think of, like John Maxwell always says, for figuring out your purpose in life, it's like what makes you sing, what makes you laugh, and what makes you cry. And if all you can think about when you have free time is podcasting and how you can improve it and do better, then keep doing it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you're very kind. I appreciate you saying that, because that's something that I came in telling myself too, that I might not get the numbers that I want right away, because that's just how the game is, like it takes time. And for me personally, like, while I'm not inherently the kind of person that likes making clickbaity shit on the internet, I do sort of realize the value of that as well. But a part of me does realize that I have to, what am I trying to say? I think I have to sort of stick it out, and like, because I mean, Joe Rogan, for example, I look up to him quite a bit. While I maybe don't listen to every episode that he does, but he, as a human being, is quite a fascinating person to sort of like look up to, because his podcast, like, he started back in 2009, and I know, like, he already was a comedian at that point. He was doing UFC and all that stuff, but still, like, it took him a long amount of time to bag that $100 million deal that Spotify was willing to give him. So I try to remind myself that while sure, numbers matter, and yes, you need to put in some work to sort of do that, it's not everything, like you said. It's not the be all and end all.
And at the end of the day, it's like, even if you made no money off of it, do you still love it?
Right.
Like even if I made no money with like loving, like with what I do, I love it, and I know it's a meaningful thing to do with my life. So if I still had to work the rest of my life, and then on the side I still hustled my buns off till I was like 85, I know that it's still meaningful work to me. And that's like the most important thing, is winning that with yourself more so than like the numbers on the outside. Because yeah, Joe Rogan won in many arenas before, but part of it is just being relentless and not giving in.
Right, definitely. Which is why I also like the thing that you mentioned about like being persistent and sticking it out. There's, I'm not saying that people who have excuses are weak. I don't want to go that far, but I think a lot of the times it's very easy to sort of underestimate ourselves. Just because we've fallen down, we've bruised a knee or two, and be like, shit, can I do this anymore? Like, I think a lot of those sort of, I guess, self-doubt, to put it simply, tends to creep in to where it makes it challenging in your mind to sort of navigate whether or not you should continue. Because I mean, I have thoughts to where I'm like, it would be easier for me to just do my 40 hours and then just do nothing.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy talking to people. And while it gets close to while I've run out of my backlog, I start thinking about, okay, I should start reaching out to these people, or otherwise, like, I won't have something to put out, or yada, yada, yada. And unfortunately, I have had some struggles to where there is, for some reason or another, or for my, like, because of myself, I feel like there have been some slip ups in terms of consistency. Consistency. But that's something that I want to work towards and sort of make sure that I'm giving it my all. Because I think personally, I mean, I don't mind saying this out loud because it's something that I've thought about. I probably am only giving 60% if I was to be generous of what I can give to this. So I definitely feel like there's a lot of leeway, and there's that 40% more that I can give to do more and to give this the energy that it deserves, or that it requires, rather, I should say. Because I do feel like maybe, again, like maybe this comes from a place of self-doubt, but a part of me does feel like I'm not doing enough, because there's been moments where instead of upload, because I try to upload these episodes on Sundays, but last week I wasn't able to put it out. I was able to put it out on Wednesday, and I was like, well, damn, like, try to be consistent, man. So it's things like that. But anyway, I don't want to sort of make this a sob story about myself, but
I think
it's
it's also important that you even speak about self-doubt, because as much as I was
Sure.
I was talking a lot about like success principle and like going after the life that you want early on, but a lot of like making it is the part where you're like sitting there being like, man, did I do enough? Man, am I actually giving it my all? Man, can I do more? Man, can I actually handle elevating? Like, I'm even currently in a phase where I'm like thinking about all the stuff that I need to elevate in. And you look at it, and then as you get more and more, like, you're like, initially you're like incompetently incompetent when you think about doing something, and then you're like competently incompetent. So you are like getting an idea how much it's going to take, and you're like, oh wow, and then you're still not really good at it. And then there's like the competence, like, and you're like slightly competent and you're slightly kind of getting results. And then there's like this wasteland. And that's where like the movies don't do justice to like actually going after things. Is you see everything. You see like this journey, but in like 2 hours. You don't see the years of struggle. You don't see the fact that like for years, I don't know how frequently Joe Rogan put out podcasts. And I don't know, like, even moving to Toronto for myself took 4 years. And like people, like, they think about it now and they're like, oh, you did, like, that's so brave. And when people actually know me, it's like it wasn't initially. It just hurt so bad that I had to keep going. And I think it's really important that as much as there is self-doubt, like, it's the main ingredient to figuring out like how to become successful. It's not necessarily like, oh, I'll never have doubts. You should never be doubtful of your capability to make an impact in this world or whatnot. It's what you do with those doubts. It's like, do you let those doubts fester and actually take over your life, or do you get back up again? And that's ultimately like, I thought it was like a really cool thing that you were able to like go to that place and share openly on your podcast about this kind of stuff, because nobody wants to hear about like how life is difficult. Everybody wants to hear about how easy it is, because coasting. But at the same time, for the people that we look up to, there's so much behind the scenes that as you follow a similar path, you're like, oh, I get it. I get why you're successful, because of how much work this takes. And it's just a matter of time. Like, if you're on that path and you refuse to give up, but then you're continuing to get better, it will happen. It's just a matter of when. It's not like a matter of if, it's a matter of when. If you had never started, yeah, it's like, oh, if I do this, maybe you would. But now that you're on the path, it's just your choice, and you continue to follow it out.
Yeah, definitely. Because and that's another thing that you sort of pointed out. I try to be, I know it's a phrase that people tend to use, but I try to be as real as possible. I don't spill all the beans, but I spill some beans that I'm willing to spill. If I can use that metaphor here. Because I think it's important to realize that, yeah, it's not a rosy journey. Like, as much as personally I try to view the world with rose tinted glasses, I do realize that there will be some specks on those glasses that will once in a while need some wiping out. I don't know if that was a metaphor worth using there, but anyway, maybe it's that self doubt. But anyway, that's just me and some self deprecating humor. But it's something that I sort of intentionally try and do, is to just talk about it as much as I'm willing to share. Because I think through that we can relate to one another as well. Because a lot of the times we can feel like we're the only ones struggling.
Mm-hmm.
We're the only ones going through shit. Because at the end of the day, when you see somebody who you think is doing well, it's quite easy to assume that things are quite smooth for them
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily realizing that what you see gives you that perception of how their life is, but then nobody knows what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the amount of sleepless nights somebody might have had, the amount of times they might have cried into a pillow all night, or the amount of times that they've just felt worthless as human beings for not getting to where they feel they should have gotten.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's quite important for us all to realize that we all go through that,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's okay to go through that. I think it's not okay if we don't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
To sort of reiterate what you mentioned, um, at the end of the day, like, what matters is, like you said, whether or not we stood back up and got back at it. That level of persistence, that understanding of not giving up. Because I'm a firm believer of the fact that you've never given up as a person until you've lost all hope. That's just how I see it, I suppose. But like, as long as you have hope and you see, or you believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even if you don't see it now, you have that level of hope and belief to understand that there will be light at the end of the tunnel eventually, even if you don't see it now. I think you can still get back up and like still do the best that you can. And like, sure, excuse me, I might have started off with lofty goals and like lofty aspirations of, okay, I'll do this, I'll do that. But then sometimes it takes some time to be able to get there. To mention what we mentioned earlier, like, it's not that easy to get to 0 to 100 in 10 seconds. It can take an hour. Um, so a lot of those realizations have definitely, excuse me, have definitely helped me along the way. And um, I think it's something that, like, through talking about it, like, you sort of shared everything that you've sort of gone through in your experience of moving to Toronto, and how there were some days when you might have felt emotionally negative, but then overall you're quite thankful for the experience you had. I apologize if I'm putting words into your mouth. Please stop me if I am. Um, but yeah, I think it's that level of understanding to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even if you don't see it now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's also
and
light in
again,
the tunnel.
that's a very beautiful way to look at it, for sure. For sure. I appreciate you bringing that up. Um, because a lot of the times we feel like there's a lot of darkness around us, but there is light. Sometimes it's just changing the lenses that we view the world in. I think it takes a level of reframing, I guess, the thoughts that we have. Which, I mean, it takes time. I can't stand here and seem holier than thou and be like, oh, this is what I was born with, but no, like, shit, it took me a while. And in some sense, it's the life experiences that I've had at this point, that have helped me see these things. So it takes time. And that's another thing I'd like to, like, mention, that we might beat ourselves up for not doing certain things or not approaching things a certain way, but then we have to realize that, firstly, we won't do it unless we try to start and do it, and secondly, I think, um it's easy to put ourselves down, especially when we're already down. um but I guess it's a lot harder to sort of dust ourselves off and stand up again, because then again that self-doubt comes in and you're like, can I actually stand back up? Like, when I try, am I going to fall again? So I think, in some sense, I think it also has to do with the evolutionary sort of perspective of our brains, and maybe a level of safety, um, and a level of comfort, and knowing that, I guess, in some sense, like, back in the day, ancient human beings would live to sustain. They would live to they would be living life, I guess, one day at a time, because you never know. Like one day, you're out hunting for food for your family, but the next day there's a pack of tigers, I guess, if they're called a pack or if they're called something else, that are wanting to make you their dinner. So I think in some sense our brains are still, and I'm no evolutionary psychologist, this is just based off of the things that I've heard and my own sort of opinion. um, but I think our brains haven't fully evolved to understanding that some of these evolutionary predispositions don't fully apply to the world that we live in now, because food is easily accessible. Shelter is, in most cases, you can find shelter. Clothes, you can find that. So, our basic necessities are met in most cases. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but generally speaking, our basic necessities are met. So, I guess in this life, we need some other way to try and challenge ourselves to make our lives a little more meaningful, I suppose. Because I guess this kind of comes full circle about the whole coasting part, and we want to make it easy for ourselves, but then I think um, there is a lot to gain from doing difficult things, and it doesn't have to be like bungee jumping or skydiving. It can be as simple as shooting your shot. Like if there's somebody that you like, that you've always like admired or whatever, like go and speak up to them, or speak to them, excuse me. Tell them that you admire them, or um, you look up to them, or that you'd like to work under them, or if you want to look at it from a relationship perspective, shoot your shot. You never know. A lot of the times you might think that people are out of your league, but you never know. Again, I say that from experience, not to say that I've been successful. I've failed the 2 times I've taken my shot, but hey, it's okay. The third time the ball might just go in. So yeah, again, I made it quite long-winded. I'd like doing that, so again, please stop me at any point if it's getting too long-winded. But um, yeah, I feel like as human beings, a part of our brain hasn't fully evolved to live in the world that we live in today. And some of it might just be because of how exponentially quickly technology has sort of grown and advanced. Um, because technology has made our life easier. So, I think it makes it, time is making it a lot more easier for us to live life easy. So I think in some sense, for our brains to tick properly, we have to sort of throw some challenges in ourselves. And like I said, they don't have to be the wildest of challenges. They could be the simplest of things. But yeah, at this point, I think I'm saying the same thing over and over again. But yeah, I mean, I want to say I appreciate you for listening. Thank you so much for just,
Of course.
listening to everything that I've been saying so far. But yeah, that's just how I see it. Everybody has their own perspective on things. And it's easy for me to stand here where I am today and say, oh, like I should throw challenges into my life and make it more meaningful and so on. But I think maybe there is some humility in also realizing that, um, and some level of gratefulness, I believe, in accepting the fact that there's some people that unfortunately can't do the things that they want to do because of the situations that they're in. So, be thankful for the fact that um, God has given you this opportunity to try, at least. Like, even if you don't want to say that, even if you're not sure where you'll end up, I think um, we've been given the opportunity to try and make things easy for ourselves. Because I mean, there's people all around the world that struggle a lot. Like, for them, meeting those basic necessities are still their priorities because of governments or whatever the fuck. I don't want to get into that now, because that's a tragedy in and of itself. Like, not just what's happening in Europe, but be it Asia or parts of the Middle East and so on. Um, but yeah, I think there's a level of humility and gratefulness in realizing that um, we're lucky. We're very lucky. And again, I'm going off into a different tangent, so I don't know why. If at any point you feel like this is going too long, please stop me. But yeah, I think, is it okay if I
Expound? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I really appreciate you for being so open to listening. But yeah, I think what I was getting at was the fact that it can be a lot of the times, it takes effort to. Well, let me rephrase that. I think in some sense we make our own luck. That's what I personally believe in. Like, it takes action to sort of open up doors and sort of make things easy for ourselves. But at the same time, I think we're a lot more luckier than some people are. And do the best that you can. This is for those of you listening and watching. I mean, um, and I always like to mention this. If at any point you want to talk it out, feel free to reach out to me. My Instagram handle, my Twitter handle is all in the description if you want to talk about some stuff. Not just on air on a podcast, it could just be off air too. But I just wanted to put that out there. But anyway, I think it is easy to forget that there's a lot of things that we have that have built the sort of foundation for us to launch ourselves up. Because again, like I said, there's people around the world that don't even have a sweater to wear, a roof to live under. So all I'm trying to say is this. I know I've said the same thing 10 times now, but realize that, there is something that's working. And I'm a big believer in this, that the universe conspires for you, even during the bad of times. Maybe because there's something that you need to learn, that you can use to further your own journey as a soul on this in this cosmic world, or however you want to see it. So yeah, be grateful for it, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And take your shot. Yeah, I'll keep it at that, because otherwise I'm gonna ramble on even more. But any sort of thoughts or things that you'd like to share about, excuse me, the things that I've said? And after that, I'd like to sort of ask a little more about your own sort of belief in faith and how that's helped you overall. But yeah, if you want to tackle both of those right away,
To
feel free
tackle
to.
both of those, the big question of faith. First of all, thank you for sharing those things. I think it's always fascinating. As much as I can share on my own beliefs, it's always important to hear another person speak on theirs, especially because a lot of the time when you speak what you believe, you actually just convict yourself more about why you do what you do. So that's awesome that you said you were reiterating yourself a lot, but that's just because you were coming back to the fact that you believe what you actually are saying. So that's awesome. And then you were asking me about my faith and why that matters to me, or
Yeah, how that matters to you and how that's helped you take this journey that you've sort of taken. Because I think a lot of the times we think about the destination, right? But then we're longer,
are you talking about
we're living.
faith in God or faith in the journey? Because those are
Sure, those are two different things. Interesting. If you want to expand on both.
okay. Well, ultimately, my faith in the journey does root from God anyway, so the overarching thing. But for people that I guess aren't of faith, you can describe it however you want. At the end of the day, you do have to have faith in the journey, and if you don't, it's just a miserable experience to not have faith in the fact that there is something that is bigger than you, that is rooting for you and hoping that you win, and believing that you have the ability. I believe earlier you were saying that we aren't capable of really knowing what we're able to do in this life. I believe we are the least capable people of knowing what we're truly able to accomplish in this life, because we hear all the doubt, because we hear all the negativity, and ultimately that's what rooted me in my own faith, is just being able to understand that I had these big dreams, and when they're big, when they're God-sized dreams, you understand that it's going to be a lot, and you'll probably never be able to do it. like I probably will never be able to reach the amount of people I want to reach, because I would love to be able to be there for everybody, but we have capacities. And that's the beauty of why, like, God came into my own life. And irregardless of which religious affiliation you lean towards, I think it's just so important for me when it comes to like Jesus and the whole story of Christ. It's that unconditional love is something that is so important for me to just kind of release all that pressure. Like being able to think that I have to measure up to God was never something that I viewed, and I didn't grow up with a faith, but I was able to view very healthy relationships with God when people would understand that everything that they did, like even if they accomplished like the millionaire status or whatever it was, like it was never actually about them. It was always about God, and God just trusting those people. And for me, it's like, man, like I would sit there being like, I just want to do all these things, but I'm not okay with it being like all about me at the end of the day. As much as it's like a beautiful thing to think that I am so great because I accomplished, like I did this, so I get that. Like that gets boring really fast. When you know it's not just about you, there's peace in the journey. And I think that ultimately the relationship with God for myself just was able to create a tremendous amount of peace in my own life, so I can rest easy knowing that I like when I go to bed at night, it's not just about me having to overperform and overdo this. Like there are definitely nights where you have to like stretch and grow yourself and push things. Like there's times where it's like before bed, it's like, okay, I've done everything that I can do with the bandwidth that you've given me, and the rest I give to you. And that brings me like a very serene amount of peace, because as long as you are, I guess, like on the journey, as we've been talking about a lot this time, you have to recognize that you can't do everything. It's where that self-doubt can be so difficult, is if you don't realize that sometimes you just need to stop that self-doubt and that self-negativity, because there is something that is at play that is larger than yourself, and it's not just about you. It's not just about me making a lot of money in business. It's not just about me when it comes to the things that God has specifically placed in my heart that bother me, that concern me, and that I feel like I should be spending my time focusing on. It's about like him. And for me, that just is the like the cherry on top. Like at the end of the day, I just love to say, oh man, I'm still a human. I don't have to deal with all the world's problems, and I don't have to figure everything out, and I don't have to be perfect, and I don't have to know all the answers to everything. That's not what I was called to do. I was called to just be someone that trusts. And that's ultimately like how that became such a vital role in who I am and how I like think. So
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think in some sense, and I mean, faith in a lot of ways grounds us, or at least I see it that way, to where, you realize that there's, like you mentioned, there's something higher than you. Like there's something that's bigger than the self. So, that pursuit in itself, um, that pursuit of life, I guess, with that sort of perspective, definitely helps make life a lot more fruitful. And I mean, I mentioned earlier the fact that I'm a big believer in, the universe sort of conspiring for us. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that again. I thought of mentioning something else, but now that's escaped. So that's okay. Maybe it's for another day. But yeah, I think it's definitely irrespective, again, like you said, irrespective of what one's faith is. I think knowing that there is something bigger than you, and that while you do have control over, you do have agency over your own actions, you're not going to be able to get everything you want by yourself. I think those realizations go a long way in, um, yeah, like grounding ourselves and sort of realizing that there's more to just this body of Prateek that lives in this world. So, that's, yeah. I guess it's like faith is definitely like, do you feel like it's something that's, and you mentioned the fact that it's something that came to you a little correct me if I'm wrong, but something that came to your life a little later. If you're, I mean, well, it's okay if you repeat yourself, but I'm just curious to know, like, how has life changed before and after? Like, if you can, if I may ask.
I would say like in every possible way without trying to be dramatic, but it has. And I think it really comes down to like who I was before. First of all, I was very like angry, very shy, didn't like people. I didn't like um, conversation. I used to be like terrified of being confronted. I could never deal with conflict. I would always say negative things. I would hang out with people that were incredibly negative, and they would just pull me down and make me feel worthless. And then the one thing I love about what happens when you choose to step in, and when I mean authentically, like there are many people that will do things ceremoniously, but when you authentically step into your own faith, it's like for me, the cool part of stepping into a relationship with God. It's weird to use the word cool in that
I
sentence.
see what you're saying.
It's just that instantly when you actually step into it, it becomes at the top of your priority list because it is the guiding principle of who you become. It's not like when you decide to, like I think back on it before, all of the decisions I made were for my mother. Like I would make decisions because she was like my number one. But then it's like right as soon as you like actually like lift yourself up to that relationship with God, you're really like, okay, like this is my filter for how I view life. And like the softening of like my heart is just like incredible. And then also the people that come into my life, I think it's so fascinating when you warm yourself up to people and when you truly know what you're rooted in. It's like I have such a deep reverence for the people that are truly devoted to living a life of faith and of service, because as much as we like to think that we are these morally superior beings where we can make righteous decisions, at the end of the day, without God, it becomes selfish. And I know that some people may think differently, but for myself, I had this argument where I used to think when I was a vegetarian that I chose not to eat meat, so I was a good person. And at the end of the day, for me, that still came down to my own judgment. That still came down to me saying what's right and what's wrong. And that's not actually the answer. For like replacing that with God, it's like you are able to understand the guiding principles. And I think there's universal truths that people can see across all religions. That's beautiful. But the beautiful thing for myself and why I ended up leaning towards Christianity over all the other ones is just that love. Like it's so incredibly powerful to feel unconditional love. We live in a culture of like show your worth before you can like show how much like you care. Like you have to show me, like impress me with who you are instead of empower me because of who I am. And with unconditional love, you just are like able to kind of relinquish those chains of thinking that you have to meet society's expectations. So for me, yeah, it really did change everything because it forced me to get honest with myself and also like honest with the things that I really wanted versus what the world said that I was supposed to do or be or whatnot. So I could go on like
That's
a ton of
beautiful. Yeah.
tangents, but it's like at the
No, it's
essence of
okay.
things, it's just like the it's just that love, like so important.
Definitely. I mean, please feel free to explore any of those tangents if you'd like. But yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think there is. I think it definitely helps in terms of zeroing down on your own sort of, I guess, predispositions. Because, like you said, right, like it helped you notice what you wanted to do rather than join the herd of sheep that is the societies we live in. I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to diminish anybody or anything, but um, I do feel like it's, again, going back to the thing that we've said 1,000 times at this point, it's easier to coach than it is to challenge ourselves. But in some sense, like you, my faith has also helped me, I guess, challenge myself in some sense, if I was to put it that way. But yeah, any other tangents that you'd like to explore before we get into the word association game?
I mean, I can honestly go on for a very long time about God and faith and the importance of that in one's life, but I'd love to try this word association game while my brain is still sharp.
Sure, all right, let's get into that then. So, but before we do, thank you so much once again. Firstly, for sharing your own experiences and your own stories, and secondly, for also being open to me rambling on for quite a while. So I appreciate you for that. So thank you so much. Um, so yeah, the word association game, excuse me, is called Bish Bash Bosh, where basically, excuse me, whoa, wow, there's a lot of phlegm there. Anyway, um, basically, I give you 5 words, one word at a time, and you have to respond to those 5 words in 3 words or in 3 phrases. Um, for those of you who are new around here, listening for the first time or watching for the first time, I give every guest the same 5 words just to sort of explore and see how everybody answers the same answers the prompts given to them, either similarly or differently. I just find that quite fascinating. So everybody that I've had on so far, except for one person, um, has had the same words. Um, and you can find these clips on the Instagram page at Random Relatability. So if you want to watch how other people responded to these 5 words, feel free to go and check that page out. But yeah, let's get into it. The first word for the segment of Bish Bash Bosh is differences. What are the 3 things calling out to you when you hear the word differences?
All good things.
Wow, I like that. I like that. Awesome. The second word is nuance.
My brain just goes to boring.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
A couple of things, a couple more things that maybe are floating around, or is it just boring?
Well, it's usually like no boring.
Hmm.
Subjective nuance,
Yeah.
interesting. Nuance in general, boring.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, nuance in itself, I think, maybe, again, like maybe this is me just psychoanalyzing myself, but I think nuance at face value can seem quite boring, but I think that's where some of those subtleties and like things that actually make us who we are.
Mm.
That's where they exist,
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it quite fun to sort of explore. Because I think in some sense, like all the things that we've spoken about today have a ton of nuance in terms of
Absolutely.
in terms of life experiences and so on. But yeah, anyway, before I get carried away onto a different tangent, the third word is learning.
I love it.
Awesome. I love these sort of sentences into 3 words. I like it. The fourth word is empathy.
Overrated but necessary.
I like that. Can you expand on that if you don't mind? I'm just curious.
Well, it is necessary to be able to empathize with a situation, but empathy is not enough. So it's like that whole faith without works. It's valuable to have empathy, but it is not useful to just sit there and empathize.
That's quite powerful. Definitely. 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 Now, that's something that we all need to realize as human beings. It's easy for me to sit on my hands and be like, oh, I empathize with you. And that's something that I've understood over time too. It's easy to sit down like, oh, I empathize with the people in Yemen or the people in Ukraine, but what is that doing for anybody?
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's definitely, you put it quite well there. The last word for this segment of Bish Bash Bosh is similarities.
And I just get to say 3 words, right?
Yes.
Unifying, beautiful, and powerful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for playing along on this segment of Bish Bash Bosh. Just a couple more questions. Well, the last one's not really a question. I don't know why I always say that. Maybe I should change. But anyway, the first question, which we might have already touched on, but I'm curious to know if you could sort of approach it from a different angle, is how do you relate to people?
By being curious.
Mm.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
Awesome.
like if you're not curious with other like about other people, people seem very boring. But if you take an interest and genuinely like are curious about people, they'll tell you things that they haven't told people that are like really close in their family. You'll hear things and you'll learn things and you'll experience things, and you'll also like grow as a person by just listening and being curious. So that's how I relate to people. Do I always do it perfectly? Absolutely not. But do I think it's the best way to actually connecting? For sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the last question is not really a question, more of a request, if you will. You've shared a lot of these sort of insights and truth bombs in some sense, I guess. But if you'd like to leave the listeners and watchers with a parting thought, or if you'd like to promote social media, whatever it may be, feel free to promote, cheap plugs, or just leave everybody with a thought. The floor is yours.
I don't need to plug anything as much as it is like wonderful. I think it's you like everyone that's listening obviously needs to get connected to you and follow all of the things that you have going on. But like I ultimately just wanted to take this time to acknowledge you because we said this at the beginning before we started the podcast, and I know that there are a lot of people that start in the world and there are a lot of people that just think about doing things. But I just wanted to acknowledge you just on the podcast because a lot of people, when they put in the work, especially with the type of podcasting, you spend your life listening to people and you spend your spare time hearing other people. And I just wanted to commend you for the curiosity you have, the desire you have to learn and grow as into like who you are and as you are. And I just think that it is so important to continue on that journey. It's a very inspiring thing for myself to observe, even though we've talked about like once or twice beforehand. But I like just wanted to take that as a quick moment, instead of plugging myself, just give you a little bit of spotlight because I think that the work that you do and the passion that you have is very important. And I really believe that if you continue and you push through the things that go on in your head when nobody's listening, when the cameras are off and you're sitting there in your bed wondering about the stats, I really think that you can do wonderful things. And I just wanted you to know that I believe in you. And I think that it is incredibly important to actually chase after what you want.
Well, you're very kind. You're very kind, Anastasia. Thank you so much because I really needed that. And I appreciate you for saying that. So thank you so much. And yeah, I wish you well in all of your endeavors as well. May God be with you and yeah, lead you along this beautiful journey that we call life. But yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier, but we might need to stay on for a couple of minutes to help the files
No problem.
upload. But yeah, for those of you listening and watching, thank you so much. I know this is quite a loaded conversation, but I am certain that there is a lot that you can take away from it. So thank you so much to you, firstly. Anastasia, I really appreciate you, yeah, like listening to me and also willing to share everything that you did. I'm really thankful for that. And yeah, I'm really thankful for those of you listening and watching as well. If you've stuck along for the 2.5, not 2.5, but like 2 hours and however long this has gone for, you're a real one. And reach out to me if you have listened to this whole thing. I'd love to talk. Just, if you have any thoughts for those of you listening and watching and you'd love to talk to someone about it, I'm here. So feel free to reach out. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much once again, and we'll see you guys next time.